We didn't carry military manuals around with us. We were out on the veldt, fighting the Boer, the way he fought us. I'll tell you what rule we applied, sir. We applied Rule 303. We caught them, and we shot them under Rule 303.
Letters from the front. From the Kyneton Guardian, dated 29th of May 1902. More soldier stories. Trooper Jarrett's story. After the toast of the King had been honoured, Trooper Jarrett gave a brief account of some of his experiences. The second day out from Middleburg, the Kennedy brothers, himself and Lieutenant Stock, the latter a soldier but just as insensible to danger as Trooper Parcels, were sent out by General Beeston to investigate concerning a number of Boers who could be seen roaming above the skyline. Almost at any time a few attempt is made to get near them, and are contemptuously termed skyline jacks. They found that there were 6 Boers, and he, Trooper Jarrett, got in the first shot, but was the next moment turning intricate somersaults. He had neglected to loosen the leading reins of his horse, and the animal had pulled back violently at the sound of the discharge of his rifle. They exchanged several shots with the Boers, who then rode away. No damage was done on either side. Trooper Jarrett then told how he, Trooper J. Kennedy, and several others, whilst out looking for cattle duffers, were deceived by information from a Boer farmer and nearly ambushed by a force of Boers 3 times their number. The Boers, who at only 150 yards distance opened volley fire on them, and though the bullets whistled around them and they could hear the lead splashing as it hit the rocks, they were not hit. Trooper Kennedy's horse was shot in the neck though, and the rider with some difficulty was rescued. Sergeant Major Fullerton and 4 men were captured by the Boers. They were disarmed and deprived of their horses, but given water and told how to get out of the line of fire. The Boers are generally supposed to be guilty of dirty tricks, such as releasing men, then shooting them when they are a few yards away. But they were not altogether as bad, as they were frequently painted, and some of our own men had recently been shot. Mr. Kerr served them right for unsoldierly conduct. One cannot imagine how it feels to have bullets whistling around. It not only makes one dance, but also induces a desire to lay low, laughter. His first experience of being under fire had made him feel that the game wasn't what it was cracked up to be. The Boer could hardly be blamed for wearing British uniform, for they were destitute of clothing of their own, and he had seen some of them bareheaded and barefooted and clothed in rags. Trooper Newton, who was in the Wilmansrust disaster, then gave a graphic account of the event. He was one of a flying column of about 250 men who on the 4th of June last year set out in pursuit of a large number of Boers. On the 4th day they got up with the rear guard of the enemy and engaged them until it became too dark to follow further. They camped and pickets were set. During the evening, word was sent around that they were to reveille at 2 o'clock in the morning, and a little after 8 o'clock the officer in command, as preparation for this early start, went around and withdrew every other picket. The Boers availed themselves of the advantage thus afforded and crept in between the pickets remaining without being detected, as the night was very dark. They attained within 20 yards of the camp, and one Boer afterwards told him that they had been there 20 minutes before they fired a shot. Some of the men were in bed, and he and others were moving around the campfire cooking some fowl, pork and other things they had gathered during the day in readiness for the morrow. Shortly after 8:30, the enemy fired the first shot. As the sound came from near the fire, he and his comrades thought that it had resulted from a cartridge that had been dropped into the flames, but the next moment a fusillade of firing broke out all around the camp. Some idea of its severity might be gathered from the fact that 70 of their horses were killed by the first volley. Many men were shot in their beds. They stood to arms and did their best, but were overmatched, there being only about 200 of them to 800 Boers. He utilised the saddle for the purposes of concealment and fired whenever he got the opportunity. He was in the act of dragging a blanket and some other things so as to further screen his position from observation when he felt himself hit in the arm and back. At first he thought he had been struck with a rifle and turned, only to find himself confronted by 6 Boers who had crept up behind him. 2 of them pointed the muzzles of their rifles at him, and the others held their weapons ready to club him. They called on him to put up his hands, and he replied by raising one hand and telling them he could not put up the other as he was wounded. They did not believe him at first and bounced him for a bit, but on being satisfied that what he had said was correct, hauled off his bandolier and told him to lay down and he would be all right. After the firing had been continuing for about a quarter of an hour, the bugler sounded, "Ceasefire!" Immediately the Boers rushed at him with utmost anger and threatened to kill him, and for a few moments there was every likelihood of them fulfilling their threat. He and his comrades interpreted their display of anger as being caused by disappointed at being deprived by the buglers' action of the chance of killing them all, as they could have done had they, the contingent men, continued to fight on. The Boers stripped them of everything they could. One Boer was stripping a young fellow of his field glasses, watch and some other things given as presents before his departure for the war, when Commandant Viljoen came along and sternly ordered the Boer to desist, telling him that if he did not clear out he would make an example of him before his own men. The saddest event of all was the cruel murder of Dr. Palmer, their surgeon. He was busy attending to the wounded, had dressed the wounds of 2 or 3 and was going to the wagon to procure some more dressings when he was intercepted by several Boers who commanded him to hold up his hands. He did not do so, but explained that he was a doctor and that he was attending to the wounded, whereupon they deliberately fired at him and blew the side of his head off. This troubled them more than anything. The veterinary surgeon then had to attend to the wounded, and he obtained great credit for his work. Then followed the sorrowful work of burying the dead. It cut him to the heart to see the mates he had been larking with a quarter of an hour previously laying cold and still. The sight so affected him that he became ill and completely broke down. There were 56 wounded and 21 were buried. 2 of the wounded died as a result of heavy jolting over ruts on the way to Middelburg Hospital, where several amputations of limbs took place. He had a touch of enteric fever, remained in the hospital there for 3 weeks, afterwards being shifted to Pretoria Hospital, where he stayed for 5 weeks. Yeah, hi everybody. It's me again. On one of these road trips I like to take for Boer War monuments, and glad you can come along. Hope you enjoy them. I love them when I start getting near the monuments. I'm not that keen on the getting up and getting there business. I got up at I got up about 7 this morning, made the flask of tea, hopped in the car with my maps, and we've got a few stops today. So the first place we're at is a little place called Marupna, which is almost a suburb of Shepparton these days. Just pulled the car over, have a look over there. There's a big monument for World War One, but I noticed that little monument. That's what we're going to go and have a look at, because I think you're going to be in for a bit of a treat. So what do we got? We got Marupna, then I'm hoping to go over to Nathalia, Echuca, then across to Pyramid Hill, and then back home again. So let's see how we go. So anyway, we're at Marupna. I'm going to show you a really good monument. Let's go. And the reason I'm saying this one is really good, because remember Sutton Grange, remember young Smith, Will Alexander Smith, killed at Wilmansrust, shot through the groin. Oh, here's another fella in memory of Private George W. Stratton, who was killed at Wilmansrust, South Africa, June the 12th, 1901, aged 19 years, for King and Country. The memorial was erected by the people of the Marupna district. Now we know that at Wilmansrust was what they called the disaster for the Australians, when the Boers ran into their camp and shot some of them while they were in their tents getting ready for sleep. So beautiful. I think it's marble. So really happy with this one. I'm opposite a McDonald's, so I think I'll go and get a egg and bacon McMuffin, have a cup of tea, and then we'll plot our next stop. Very happy with this one. And you can see they really make an effort to highlight the effort of the Australians. And look at that big white one for the Great War or World War II. Stop recording.